What does the American Red Cross have to do with the Salem Witch Trials? Find out in today's episode of The Thing About the Salem Witch Trials. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. Our ancestors experienced the Salem Witch Trials. Each week, we bring you informative episodes about those trials.
Today, we're focusing on a remarkable woman who lost two sisters to the Salem Witch Trials and was jailed herself for several months, but went on to help found a new town, where several Salem residents would relocate after the witchcraft panic. The woman we know as Peter Cloyce was born Sarah Town to parents William Town and Joanna Blessingtown in Salem in 1642, when her oldest sister was already 21 years old.
Sarah was the youngest sibling of Rebecca Nurse and Mary Easty, two of the most well-known victims executed during the trials. Because she ultimately survived, Sarah is often overshadowed by those sisters, but her story is incredibly powerful.
Before the Panic of 1692, Sarah seemed to live a relatively ordinary Puritan life. But as in any life, there was some occasional drama. Her first husband, Edmund Bridges, sometimes got into disputes with wealthy merchants, was once taken to court for wearing a periwig. However, he was also trusted as a witness and juror.
After Edmund passed away on June 24, 1682, without a will, leaving Sarah alone with their 5 children, she married her second husband, Peter Cloyce, in late 1682 or early 1683. Peter's brother Thomas was married to Susanna Lewis, the aunt of the afflicted woman Mercy Lewis, making Peter Cloyce something of an uncle to Mercy, who was the subject of last week's episode.
Both Peter and Sarah joined Samuel Parris's Salem Village Church, with Peter signing on as a founding member on November 19, 1689, and Sarah joining soon after on January 9, 1690.
But the Cloyces carried a heavy burden of grief. Peter's brother Thomas was killed in the spring of 1690 when Wabanaki and French forces attacked Fort Loyal in what is now Portland, Maine. This frontier war trauma deeply affected their family network, even before the witch trials began.
And things got really scary for Sarah in March 1692, when her 71-year-old sister Rebecca Nurse was shockingly arrested for witchcraft on the 24th. 3 days later, on Sunday, March 27th, which was Easter Sunday, in much of the Christian world, Sarah's life was changed forever.
Reverend Samuel Parris delivered an aggressive sermon titled "Christ Knows How Many Devils There Are in His Church," using the text of Judas betraying Jesus to suggest that there were devils right there in Christ's little church. This isn't what you would expect for an Easter sermon. Well, the Puritans didn't actually acknowledge Easter as a special holiday.
Yeah, this was an ordinary sacrament Sunday, just the once a month time that they did communion in the church. And Samuel Parris, he didn't name names from the pulpit, but Sarah Cloyce knew exactly who he was talking about. In his sermon notebook, he wrote that the sermon was occasioned by dreadful witchcraft broke out here a few weeks past, and one member of this church and another of Salem, upon public examination by civil authority, vehemently suspected for she-witches and upon it committed. So he's saying that a member of his church, the Salem Village Church, and another from Salem Town have been accused of witchcraft.
The church member of Salem was Rebecca Nurse. She attended service in Salem Village most weeks, but she took communion in Salem Town, something she'd been doing since she'd arrived in Massachusetts in 1635. This statement by Parris was an acknowledgement that the sermon was about Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey, the member of Parris's village church.
Parris had just witnessed the examination of Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah interpreted the sermon as a direct attack upon their family. In response, Sarah did something absolutely unthinkable for a Puritan woman in that era. She stood up, walked out of the meeting house, and perhaps forcefully slammed the door behind her.
Witnesses said she flung the door violently to the amazement of the congregation. That single act of rebellion put a massive target on her back. However, Robert Califf later wrote that The wind shutting the door forcibly gave occasion to some to suppose she went out in anger.
So he's going to blame it on the weather. And everybody in the church is like, no, she slammed it. So fun. Sarah Stevens and Marguerite Pask had something to say about Sarah's departure. They testified that afflicted Jemima Ray told them in a fit that Sarah Cloyce's apparition told her that one Lord's Day, when she ran out of the meeting house from the sacrament in a great rage, her master met her outside.
Sarah allegedly curtsied to her master, who was, of course, the devil in this fantasy. Then Sarah signed the devil's book, curtsied again, and left the area.
So the primary sources diverge a little bit with this. Some people are saying slammed, some people are saying wind. But one thing that they agree on is that Sarah Cloyce, a member of Paris's church, voluntarily got up and left during a sermon that Sunday. None of the sources indicate whether her husband Peter followed her out.
The retaliation escalated very quickly. 8 days later, on April 4th, a formal complaint was filed against Sarah Cloyce and Elizabeth Proctor by Jonathan Walcott and Nathaniel Ingersoll.
The accusations leveled against Sarah were highly theatrical and severe. The afflicted girls alleged that they saw Sarah acting as a deacon of the devil, serving red bread and blood wine at a massive witches' sacrament Sabbath.
There were also claims of violence. John Indian, the enslaved man in the Reverend Paris household, claimed that the specter of Sarah Cloyce bit, choked, and pinched him, even sinking her teeth into him with such force that she drew blood. Abigail Williams, also in the Paris household, alleged that the specters of Sarah and her sister Rebecca confessed to murdering several recently deceased people in the community, including Benjamin Porter, Goodman Harwood, Rebecca Shepherd, and Rebecca Shepherd's child.
Because Sarah was the sister-in-law of Mercy's aunt, Mercy Lewis largely avoided actively accusing Sarah, and when she did accidentally cry out the name Sarah Cloyce, she quickly recanted and said that she had actually seen nobody at all. Instead, the most severe testimony came from Abigail Williams and John Indian.
On April 11th, 1692, Sarah was brought to the Salem Town meetinghouse for her examination. The examination was an intense, miserable ordeal, but throughout, Sarah Cloyce defended herself.
During this examination, when John Indian accused Sarah of hurting him a great many times, she looked him in the eye and said, "Oh, you are a grievous liar." Abigail Williams then doubled down, claiming Sarah was a deacon at the witches' sacrament. Sarah asked for water and then sat down as if seized with a dying fainting fit, according to Samuel Paris, who recorded the incident.
The afflicted girls immediately fell into fits and cried out, "Oh, her spirit is gone to prison to see her sister nurse." That abruptly ended her examination. Sarah was sent to the Boston jail, where she languished in deplorable conditions for 9 months. She spent the sweltering summer and freezing winter heavily ironed with fetters on her hands and legs.
And remember, she's just accused. She's not been tried. She's not convicted of anything, but she's in chains for 9 months in these terrible places where all kinds of diseases spread. The smell was horrible. It was just nasty. But throughout this terrible ordeal, her husband, Peter Cloyce, showed incredible devotion. Peter stood firmly by his wife's side. By August of 1692, a church delegation went to ask why Peter was no longer attending Sunday services in Salem Village. They reported back that Brother Cloyce was hard to find because he was constantly at the prison in Ipswich, refusing to abandon Sarah.
In September, while both imprisoned, Sarah Cloyce and Mary Easty, the sisters, collaborated. The surviving town sisters, because Rebecca Nurse's passed, collaborated to author a joint petition to the court, asking for counsel and a fair hearing. Devastatingly, Sarah was present in the jail when both Rebecca and Mary were taken away to the gallows to be executed. Mary had written a profoundly moving petition, not to save her own life, but to beg that no more innocent blood may be shed. She said, "If the judges and the courts continue in this way, more innocent will die."
And all three of the Town sisters submitted petitions to the court during this. Rebecca Nurse had her own, Mary Easty had one, and Sarah and Mary had one together. They were all fighting for innocent lives. But Sarah's fate, however, would be different from her sisters. Deliverance Hobbs failed to name Sarah Cloyce in her confession about a witch's feast, and Sarah's trial was saved for later in the process due to absent witnesses, including Sarah's sister-in-law, Mary Town, and her niece, Rebecca Town.
The sheer volume of cases also limited how much the Court of Oyer and Terminer could do in 1692. Working in Sarah's favor, the temporary Court of Oyer and Terminer went into an extended recess following its September cases and was finally replaced by the permanent Superior Court of Judicature before any more women and men were tried.
And under the Superior Court of Judicature, spectral evidence was not allowed, so it was hard to prove the cases. And the delay saved Sarah's life. On January 13th, 1693, when the grand jury did evaluate her case, they did not find enough evidence to proceed. They returned her indictments as ignoramus, meaning we're not knowledgeable of any information to prove that she should go to trial. And she was finally released after paying her jail fees. Sarah and Peter became part of a movement of witch trial refugees that were seeking to start anew. They moved westward to Danforth's Farm, a wilderness area that would become Framingham, Massachusetts, when incorporated in 1700. Seeking to distance themselves from the horrific trauma of 1692, they changed their name from Cloyce to Clays, and they were soon joined by other extended family members from the Town family especially, who were devastated by the witch trials.
Today, you can still trace their journey as they built their home along a path that is still known as Salem End Road in honor of the refugees who settled there. 5 of the homes built by these Salem Village refugees still stand in Framingham.
And Sarah lived in Framingham until her death in 1703. Tragically, she had died younger than either of her sisters, but her legacy lives on through her many, many multitudes of descendants, including a very famous one that we're going to talk to you about right now.
Sarah had a daughter from her first marriage named Hannah. She married Samuel Barton. They moved over to the brand new town of Oxford, Massachusetts. Apparently, the family really put their roots in because over 100 years later, Clarissa Harlow Barton was born in Oxford on Christmas Day in 1821 to her parents Sarah Stone Barton and Stephen Barton.
Clarissa is better known to us as Clara Barton, the angel of the battlefield. This line of descent makes the town's direct ancestors of the famous founder of the American Red Cross. Sarah Cloyce was one of Clara's 32 great-great-great-grandparents. Clara was only 5 generations removed from the Salem Witch Trials, which is exactly how removed I am from the American Civil War, during which Clara first rose to fame for her battlefield medical care.
Sarah Cloyce's enduring legacy has also made a mark on pop culture and literature, like her sisters have. She was famously the protagonist of the 1985 PBS miniseries 3 Sovereigns for Sarah, where she was portrayed brilliantly by Vanessa Redgrave. You can also check out our interviews with 2 authors who have written about Sarah Cloyce, Antonio Stuckey and Janice C. Thompson. Also, Nathaniel Hawthorne featured her in his classic story, Young Goodman Brown, but he was unavailable for an interview.
Sarah Cloyce may be remembered as the sister who survived, but her strength, defiance, and resilience make her a foundational figure in early American history. She spoke her mind, stood up for her sisters, survived the jails, and walked away from Salem forever. Thanks for joining us today to remember Sarah Cloyce.
Like and subscribe wherever you're tuning in and visit us at aboutsalem.com.
And remember to tune in for our new podcast, Salem Witch Trials Daily, every day to follow along with the events of the Salem Witch Trials.